ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today at the ISAS webinar titled Shifting Dynamics in Maldives-India Relations. This seminar will delve into the Maldives-India alliance, which, as we know, has undergone various shifts and turns in the recent years, with Prime Minister Modi's visit to the island state in July 2025, which marked yet another reset in this relationship. So this webinar today will unpack various imperatives that are influencing this specific relationship. To speak on this topic, we're very delighted to have with us Ms. Eva Abdullah. She's chairperson of the Maldives Policy Think Tank and also the former Deputy Speaker of Maldives. This session today will be chaired by Dr. Iqbal Singh Sivia. He's the director of the Institute of South Asian Studies, NUS. And today's session will also be live streamed on the ISAS Facebook page. I shall now invite Dr. Sivia to commence this session.
Thank you. Thank you, Kanika. On behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar entitled Shifting Dynamics in Maldives-India Relations. The discussion, I'm delighted to add that this discussion also marks the launch of ISAS's new series entitled India in Asia, which explores how India's rise is viewed across the region. As India's geopolitical, economic, and cultural influence has grown, there is a need to analyze how it is perceived and to examine the role it is playing in shaping the regional order. This series will convene scholars and policymakers to reflect on the expectations, opportunities, and challenges surrounding India's expanding presence in Asia. We begin this series with the Maldives. The Maldives is an apt choice given its strategic location in the Indian Ocean and its proximity to key shipping lanes that are vital to global trade and energy flows. The Maldives holds growing importance as a regional security and connectivity hub. India has long been one of the Maldives' closest partners, offering trade, developmental aid, capacity building, and crisis assistance, including during the COVID-19 pandemic. However, the relationship has also experienced shifts. Political changes in Malé have alternated between a strong India first orientation and an occasional India out sentiments, shaped by domestic politics and domestic dynamics and the expanding relationship with other powers, particularly China. As Kanika mentioned before me, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Malé in July 2025, and this marked a significant effort to reset the relationship. It resulted in 6 new memoranda of understanding spanning fisheries, agriculture, meteorology, digital public infrastructure, United Payments Interface, and pharmaceuticals, along with the US $550 million concessional line of credit. The two sides also advanced talks on a potential free trade agreement. This visit by Prime Minister Modi came as the Maldives faces serious economic challenges, including high debt and dependence on foreign investment. At the same time, the Indian Ocean is emerging as a key arena of Sino-Indian competition, with small island states like the Maldives navigating growing geopolitical pressures. The Maldivian case reflects a broader story, of course. And this is a story about how small states balance competing powers, pursue development, and maintain autonomy in a polarizing world. Understanding these dynamics is essential to grasping the evolving strategic landscape of the Indian Ocean and Asia more broadly. We are honored to welcome Eva Abdullah, chairperson of the Maldives Policy Think Tank, to share her insights. A 3-term member of parliament and former deputy speaker, Ms. Abdullah has focused on governance, foreign policy, and gender issues. And she has served on key national security and economic committees. Internationally, she has worked with the International Parliamentary Union, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, the World Health Organization, and United Nations Population Fund. Like all of you, I'm looking forward to her perspectives on Maldives-India relations and the broader challenges that face small states in the region today. With that, I thank you all for joining us, and Eva, over to you.
Thank you so much, Iqbal. Thank you so much for having me. This really is one of my favorite topics of recent. Let me start a little bit about looking at the Maldives foreign policy at the moment in general before going into Maldives-India specifically. The Maldives celebrated our 60th independence anniversary just last month in July. For nearly all of those 6 decades of our independence, Maldives foreign policy warranted very little attention. Academics like yourselves, think tanks like yourselves, rarely studied it. Think tanks held no seminars dedicated to our diplomatic choices, and our neighbors could count on us, as could distant powers who are keen on these waters and on this region. The Maldives was predictable, and the Maldives was dependable. Small states like the Maldives for a number of years were viewed by and large as passive players in international relations. Across our region, the South Asia region, the Indian Ocean, and in fact, in the entire Indo-Pacific region, which is dotted with small states like ours, these small states have traditionally been overlooked and seen as bystanders. But this, as you said, is changing now. The geopolitical theater is far more complex, and these states have geolocations that they can, and that they now know they can, leverage in the great power chessboard. And nowadays, as you said, Iqbal, Maldives is a very apt example. Nowadays, nowhere is this leveraging is more compelling than in the case of the Maldives. The Maldives is now proving to be a compelling example of post-Cold War small state diplomacy. Compare the Maldives to the titans that it's trying to navigate between. The Maldives GDP, minuscule, tiny, tiny population, very tiny and small landmass, but outsized geostrategic importance, and hence this topic now. The Maldives is showing remarkable diplomatic dexterity in leveraging that strategic position. Hedging, that's the word used by every commentator speaking on the Maldives foreign policy at the moment. Dexterity is another word. Pragmatic is another word. Opportunistic is another word. And I would add volatile. Maldives foreign policy right now, the way I see it, is about asking one fundamental question. What will each partner bring? What will each bilateral international partner bring? India and China, yes, our biggest traditional partners. But now we're seeing Turkey, we're seeing the Gulf states coming in. They have all become big actors in the Maldives, while the others like the United Kingdom, United States, Japan, South Korea, the European Union, all remain very quiet, but very enduring partnerships. China brings in trade, tourism, infrastructure. India brings in good governance projects, development projects, medical, education, infrastructure, tourism, and of course, financial assistance. Turkey is emerging as a military partner. The Gulf states emerging as investment partners just over the last 2 years in a big way. The European Union and the United Kingdom provide development assistance, especially in fields like climate change, police training, judicial development, decentralization, etc. And the United States has maintained a very enduring relationship here, and even stepped up over the last few years, opening their first embassy in the Maldives. And just last month, the ambassador announcing that they're opening an American Chamber of Commerce here. And Maldives is asking, what will each partner bring? And as the Maldives does this, as the Maldives picks and chooses, what is utmost on Maldives foreign policy? What is utmost on Maldives' mind? What its foreign policy priorities? Firstly, well, what is driving Maldives foreign policy? Firstly, debt, 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 debt. The current administration, when it came in 2023, inherited a huge debt crisis. The debt and fiscal situation has determined, therefore, every other decision that the government has had to make, including on who it will engage with internationally and bilaterally. The debts mature next year. And this means that the government simply does not have the funds to fulfill its own pledges. And this is domestically costing the government a lot of political leverage. The roads are unbuilt. The harbors are incomplete, the dollar rate is surging, the contractors are unpaid, and practically zero work is done on human development goals and long-term development. Gender, for instance, I do not think has been mentioned over the last 2.5 years. Decentralization and local governance is being hacked away at because the central government needs the funds that is being generated by the local councils. And my president, the Maldivian president, is reduced to announcing the opening of ATM machines as breaking news. On August 12th, the government announced opening ATM machines in 47 islands. Now, I'm sure the president would also like to be announcing completed roads and harbors and housing projects, but given the fiscal situation, the president and the government is reduced to announcing ATM machines as breaking news. And therefore, this debt situation determines every single other decision that the government can make on anything else. It's the single biggest underlying variable. Secondly, the other factor is the Maldives GDP. Given our GDP, we could never do this on our own. We can never build our own roads. We can never build our own airports. We can never build our own harbors and our own roads and our own housing projects and our own education and our own health. And therefore, these needs are very immediate. So therefore, the second urgent factor is our own GDP. For example, the over-reliance on China, which you mentioned, Iqbal, which really started around 2019, brought massive capital and construction capabilities to the Maldives, such as a $300 million bridge and housing projects. Maldives, on its side, has been happy to take this assistance, regardless of whether the assistance comes in concessional terms or not. And regardless of, or especially because this kind of money comes in with no questions asked. The no questions asked kind of money, no questions about the governance situation in the country, on domestic situation, whether on corruption issues or on clamping down on political dissidency, for instance. And the Maldives, thirdly, the Maldives has very restricted scope for economic diversification. And so this is the third consideration I think drives Maldives' foreign policy at the moment. The third reason why Maldives is asking, who brings what can we get immediately? The limits of the Maldives' economic base leaves the Maldives with very little choice but to diversify. Tourism cannot always be the goose that lays the golden egg. And fewer islands are investing in fishing. And so especially post-COVID, with its devastating economic blow to a country like this, Maldives, like many others, has been forced to fundamentally reassess how do we expand our economic base. And I think this is where the Gulf states are emerging as key players. This is also an indication that the Maldives wants to diversify and prioritize outside just South Asia and the traditional partners, outside just our usual traditional partners. And this, the Gulf states emerging here, investment here, I think is an example of the Maldives truly leveraging and very aggressively leveraging its strategic location. And this brings us inevitably to the flip side of all this. What are the risks? What are the limits? Is the Maldives overextending itself? Let me still continue with the Gulf states investment, because I think this project, well, firstly, because it's so big, because it's so new, and because it poses a lot of other potential risks. This $8.8 billion investment backed by the Gulf states, the aim, of course, is to attract global finance and capital to the Maldives. But a project of this scale, a project that outscales our entire GDP and our entire economic output, this brings with it serious questions and risks. We're talking about debt distress, financial exposure, and significant reputational risk should things go belly up. The Maldives, dependent as it is on foreign investment and tourism, simply cannot afford the reputational fallout in financial circles if things go belly up. As it stands, Moody's and Fitch has systematically downgraded the country over the last 2-3 years. And so this kind of risk brings further questions. Domestically, the project is raising eyebrows. Politicians and policymakers are asking, is this project feasible? People on the streets are asking, is this actually real, or is it just another headline? Given our history of headlines, this is a very relevant question. This is a very legitimate question. And people are asking, is this yet another ruse for more corruption? And quite legitimately, people are asking and questioning the risks that come with more and more debt. And then other risks. The strategic location, benefits of this strategic location are numerous, and I don't need to cite the benefits of a strategic location to a largely Singapore audience, I think. But it is precisely this location that exposes other risks too. For instance, security vulnerabilities. An offshore financial hub could complicate maritime security monitoring. It could facilitate money laundering and provide new opportunity for drugs and human trafficking. And for the Maldives, another very legitimate question is, could it exacerbate existing terrorism risks? The Maldives, given the Maldives' existing security challenges, the Maldives already has the highest per capita rate of foreign fighters who joined ISIS, has experienced domestic terror attacks, including a bomb attack on our capital city very recently, and sits close enough to Sri Lanka with its very recent terror attacks. And the Maldives already appears on multiple international red flags on this, including on the US State Department's. Now, this is relevant for any other state doing this, but compounded with the fact that the Maldives is hardly known for its strong oversight, an offshore financial center could potentially pose other security risks too. And this brings us to the regional power dynamics. What do the Maldives' traditional partners think? What do India and China think? New Delhi has historically viewed the Indian Ocean as its strategic backyard and will view increased foreign investment in the Maldives' infrastructure as a challenge to its regional hegemony, for sure. And Beijing sees the Maldives as a very key node in its Silk Road and will understand major financial Gulf investment will dilute Chinese economic influence here. And other partners like the United States and the European Union will be watching these Gulf investments and Turkey's expanding military partnership very closely. Undoubtedly, these decisions are for the Maldivians to make, for the Maldives to make, for the benefit of its people. But concerns by other traditional partners will always be a consideration, will always have to be a consideration. And this, I think, is a good point to start looking closer at India-Maldives relationship. As Kanika said, as Iqbal, you've said, it is exactly this relationship that has warranted such close scrutiny of Modi's foreign policy over the last decade or so. And it is largely the twists and turns of this relationship that is labeling the Modi's foreign policy as deft, shrewd, pragmatic, and why I label it volatile. On July 26th, as you said, Iqbal, the Maldives celebrated its Independence Day and Prime Minister Modi visited the Maldives. The Prime Minister's visit was the first state visit under our current administration. Under normal circumstances, an Indian Prime Minister visiting the Maldives would be unremarkable, or rather par for the course. But under the current administration, this visit by the Indian Prime Minister and the ensuing imagery and commitments that followed the visit were nothing short of monumental. Over the past decade, this relationship, this most stable and reliable of partnerships, has been quite remarkable and even alarming at times. Anti-India sentiment emerged in our politics for the first time. We've seen Maldivian presidential campaigns polarized around India. Over the last decade, we've seen the India first stance of one government give way to the India out stance of another, and believe it or not, quickly pivot back to the India first stance of yet another government. Sloganeering around India became politically expedient for Maldivian political parties and Maldivian politicians. And yet, even through the most fraught period in the relationship, I would say around 2019, 2020, and over the last 2 years, even through the most fraught periods of the relationship, India solidified its position as the Maldives' most important international partner. In addition to the development and financial assistance, India remained the Maldives' most reliable and positioned itself as the most reliable first responder. And we saw this most recently during COVID, when we saw the vaccine rollout. Within hours of India's own rollout, India gave vaccines to the Maldives. And as soon as the Maldives opened its borders, Indians topped our tourism arrivals, providing a much needed lifeline during our hard hit economy. But it is precisely because of the absolute and sheer extent of this assistance and relationship that stirred alarm among Maldivian politicians and trickled down somewhat to the public as well. 3 reasons. Firstly, protracted delays in Indian projects eroded confidence in the projects and also impacted the underlying relationship of these projects. Secondly, perceived overreach in domestic affairs and perceived alignment with specific political factions in the Maldives fostered an image of India being vested in particular political outcomes in the Maldives. Thirdly, controversies concerning military presence ignited accusations of interventionism, with some arguing that this was a step too far. Therefore, in this very and increasingly sensitive landscape, when this new government won the 2023 presidency, Delhi would have had very good reason to be alarmed. Here was an incoming president whose electoral battle cry had been India out. India out as a presidential campaign battle cry. And first steps by the new sworn-in president made things even worse. The president's first port of call was Turkey and then China on state visits. And this was a definite stump to New Delhi, no doubt. This is a break from past tradition of Maldivian presidents making India their first port of call. India would have been caught off guard, perhaps even with the win. And Maldives' other traditional partners would have been equally alarmed. And very few, in fact, I think only one, so very few apart from one, would have seen the point of rapprochement that we are in now. Few would have predicted the point we are in now. The current administration, however, has proven to be pragmatic, and hence this point of rapprochement. The current administration, the Maldivian administration, has proven to be far more pragmatic than anyone anticipated. With mounting debt, combined with very underwhelming Chinese support, and lessons from Sri Lanka's own fiscal and debt crisis very close at hand, the Maldivian incoming government had to make hard and fast choices about priorities and about partnerships. With our 7.5 billion economy struggling, the reality was very brutal. If the Maldives wanted to live to fight another day economically and fiscally, the country had to be pragmatic. And so, despite all the talk about reducing dependence on India, it is India that even this government has had to turn to. So the Maldives again quickly pivoted from India out to India in. So very, very in. And India's response was swift, and India's response has been substantial. India really doubled down on the assistance with this new administration. By the time Prime Minister Modi left the Maldives, after just a 2-3 day weekend, India had pledged an extra $565 million credit line, agreed to reduce the Maldives' annual debt repayment burden by 40%, signed new MOUs and agreements, and even officially commenced free trade agreement negotiations. And this is coming on top of all the assistance and financial assistance that had been pledged 2024. And to me, observing this time around, looks like India is demonstrating a strategy of directly addressing core Maldivian concerns, of being very responsive rather than just responding. Firstly, on the political front, India seems to be tackling Maldive concerns about favoritism towards specific political parties. direct BJP dialogue with the current Maldives ruling party. This is previously unheard of, unseen. The current Maldives ruling party, the PNC, are not known to have close relations with Indian political parties. Second, India addressed core criticisms on the streets about project delays. Rather than announcing new projects, India is promising to deliver the existing projects, expediting the existing projects and finishing the existing projects. And thirdly, and quite critically, setting itself apart from all the other Maldives partners, India offered immediate financial relief rather than just long-term infrastructure commitments, therefore directly tackling the Maldives' primary concern of approaching debt obligations in 2026. So in fact, if the Maldives' foreign policy can be termed deft, the Indian approach to the Maldives can be termed defter. Maldives' foreign policy has always been astutely calibrated to the times, shrewdly adapting to the prevailing global order. Non-alignment during the Cold War, hedging in today's far more complex order. Other small states with similar challenges and similar concerns like climate change, debt, protecting their EEZ narrow economic bases. Other similar states would be pursuing similar strategies, are pursuing similar strategies. But right now, the Maldives maneuvering on the great power chessboard, I would say, is a textbook case, example, as you said. However, the Maldives must prove to be even more pragmatic, with an eye on the long-term and ultimate goal of sovereignty and the prosperity of its people. And therefore, I think this needs to be combining principled with pragmatic. This pattern of changing foreign policy and partners cannot twist and turn and repeat every 5-year electoral cycle here. Maldives cannot hope to play one giant power against another. Expanding partnerships and diversification does not mean that. Being deft and pragmatic cannot mean that. Ultimately, while we cannot alter the fundamental realities of geography, we retain agency over how we manage our vital partnerships, including Maldives' relationship with India. The choices that the Maldives make now will shape not only our prosperity and security, but the broader stability of the Indian Ocean region itself. And this responsibility of security and stability of our people and of the region for all of us, whether governments, politicians, think tanks, academics, demands our constant attention and mindfulness. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity as well.
Eva, thank you so much for so eloquently reviewing. No, seriously, eloquent as usual. But you very eloquently reviewed the trajectories of India Maldives relations, highlighting some of the changes that have occurred over the years. But you've also hinted to the domestic, not hinted to, but you've also highlighted, I should add, the sort of domestic impediments that lead to some shifts and then returns, etc. And I'd like to pick some of the points you highlighted, but I should also add two other very important points that you raised. One is the fact of agency. It's often the case that when people talk about small states, they treat them almost as pawns in the greater power tussles that are going on, and they fail to pay attention to the agency, the negotiating power, the way small states play their cards as well. That's something that came across very strongly in your comments. The other point I think that's incredibly important is the fact that it's not just about India-China competition, right? When we study India Maldives relations, you have to look at the multiple other players who are involved and engaging the Maldives as trying. You rightly brought that up, and that actually leads me to my the first of many questions that came to mind, and this is about one of the other players that's involved. I mean, you've addressed the India case, you've addressed China, but you also hinted to the role that the US is increasingly playing. And it's I should commend you that we've got to about half an hour of this discussion. We've not mentioned Trump once. Um, but but coming back to the US, the US and the Maldives have signed a defense agreement. The US has opened a mission in the Maldives in recent years. How do you see the sort of trajectory of Maldives-US relations, but also how does this fit in within the competition that's going on between India and China? Do people in the Maldives view India and the US as partners, or do they see do they view India, US, and China as part of a more complex sort of triangular contestation for influence?
To be very honest, Iqbal, the Maldives is currently so preoccupied with India-China relations that other partners like the United States barely come up in topic here. It barely comes up in political discourse. It barely comes up in parliamentary debate, for instance, or even research. The American presence here hasn't really fluctuated much. Like I said, it's an enduring relationship. It's a very stable relationship. And even over the last 2-3 years, when many states are finding themselves in very volatile relationship with America, never knowing what the next day will bring, that hasn't been the case for the Maldives. Even, for instance, with the recent announcement of increasing tariffs, I think we chatted about this in Colombo earlier this year. Even with the increase in tariffs for many other countries, the Maldives hasn't experienced that same. In fact, the government was saying that the suggestion of increase in tariffs for Thailand, Indonesia, etc., our competition in fish export, for instance, that might be beneficial for the Maldives. But really, the relationship, it's enduring, it's dependable, and it hasn't really fluctuated. There's a lot of American assistance in both development and in like the defense agreement that you mentioned. And it looks like the Americans are stepping up their presence here with opening an American Chamber of Commerce. That suggests trade investment or trade relationship seriously expanding.
Excellent. And on a related note, I'll stop after this question because we have some questions coming in online as well. But how, in given that the Maldives has been negotiating between the competition between India and China for some time now, are there no perceived differences in the sort of diplomatic approaches that India takes and China takes?
Certainly. Which is why I said the relationship, the recent meetings between our leading party and the BJP. I mean, that's the difference. I mean, the current administration is not known to have any kind of political relationship with Indian political parties. The underwhelming Chinese assistance for the new Maldives administration, that would have been quite alarming, not just for the government, but for a lot of people observing this relationship. The current leading political party here, when they were last in government under President Yamin, they're an offshoot of President Yamin's party, had such cordial relations with China that I think that the new administration coming in would have expected the same kind of relationship. And so therefore, what everybody is calling very underwhelming China response to this new relationship, China must have its own reasons. I think that would have been quite a shocker for the new government, and which really helped solidify India as the leading development partner.
Okay, I'm sorry, so please go ahead.
Yeah.
No, please go ahead.
And India has maintained India's maintained a relationship of cultural exchanges, of education, of medicine, and a lot of assistance, even good governance projects. I mean, India played a huge role in the Maldives democratization movement. I mean, I can safely say that because I was very privy to the kind of assistance that India lent. The kind of skills building and capacity building that India lent when Maldives was trying to democratize as well. So that kind of suggests the very different approaches that the two countries take. China is very much like China is in all parts of the world. China is very much about large infrastructure projects. But India, on the other hand, has been, I mean, on concessional terms, but also increasingly concessional terms as well.
Actually, can I invite you to say a little more about you mentioned India's role in democratization in the Maldives, because this is something that is often discussed, right? What sort of impact great power rivalry has on smaller states or greater power. So in that sense, what sort of role has India played, and has the sort of Sino-India relation rivalry impacted democratic processes in Maldives?
Oh, Iqbal, I wish we had another 30 minutes for this.
We'll do another seminar on that.
We should. If I could bring Trump in here now, President Trump in here. So America's withdrawal from good governance projects and aid in this part of the world, that's left a huge impact on development projects and governance projects here. For instance, if that had happened around 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, the Maldives would have really struggled, because a small state like ours, we depend a lot on the goodwill of our trading partners. So the United Kingdom, the European Union, the Americans, and the Indians siding on the side of the Democrats or the democratization or the reform movement. If nothing else, it's a huge morale boost and a huge victory for those who are struggling domestically to change the country. And we saw that again under President Yamin. These countries made it absolutely very clear that they are not going, that they do not tolerate, or that they will not side with an autocrat who's clamping down on political dissidency, that they will not side with increasing and very rampant corruption in the country. And this is a huge boost for those who are trying to play a democratization role in the country. And so that affects for a small state like ours, that has a huge impact. It has a huge impact on political pluralism, on press freedom. I've just actually been taking notes on 2004, 2005. In 2004, 2005, we saw our first big mass uprising in the country in August 2012 to 13. And with the anniversary, I was trying to take notes. And the diplomats, the United Kingdom diplomats, the European Union diplomats, the American diplomats, the Red Crescent, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, they all sent people here to watch to observe the situation here. I, at the time, with a few others, was running an underground NGO, well, trying to be an NGO, but underground network, trying to monitor the status of the 200 plus political dissidents who'd been jailed at the time, given the uprising. And we were trying to get the word from the jails and out into the world. And it's these diplomats and it's these international partners like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and BBC and various other media outlets that really help get the word out. And that kind of thing helps.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I now, as promised, going to turn to the questions that have come in. And I have a few that have come in. So let me start with one that actually picks up on the point that you made earlier. In your view, could we see the India out strategy that was advocated and became a platform of the government. Could we perhaps view that as a means of perhaps establishing more agency for the Maldives in its negotiations with India and China?
Undoubtedly. Undoubtedly.
Mm.
I mean, there is some genuine sentiment there as well. Like I said, three reasons that I see why there was some genuine statement. But by and large, to me, it was political posturing. And I say that because I think we have evidence of that now. When the current administration, like I said, this party came into government with India out as a main political slogan. But when the government came in and quickly pivoted to India in, well, I mean, they're not saying India in, but very quickly moved towards India, there's been no outcry. There's been no public outcry from within the Maldives. There's been no outcry from the president's own political side. And that suggests that the India out sentiment is not necessarily that embedded in the country. And this is why I'm saying we need to be, yes, pragmatic, but we need to combine principled with pragmatic. We cannot hope to use this. We cannot hope to play this one power against another. That's a very dangerous game. We need to pick our friend and remain steadfast. And that is for the security of this region. Our presidents have huge powers constitutionally given because it's a presidential system. It comes with huge powers. And with that comes with the power to change the course of foreign policy every 5 years. But we cannot do that. We cannot hope to keep changing our partners and keep playing one power against another, China against the Maldives in this great power chessboard. Every time our presidency changes or every time our fiscal situation changes either. We need to be steadfast. We need to stay true to our friends. And I think this goes for all states, not just small states.
Well said. Another question that's come in goes like this. How do security collaborations between India and the Maldives address concerns like piracy and terrorism?
It does. It does. India is, I mean, we share waters. We share waters. And India is one of the Maldives, if not the key partner in maintaining maritime security, India, Sri Lanka. I mean, the collaboration is absolutely utmost. And this is, maritime security is one area where we can, in fact, say, what is Maldives security without India being a partner?
Sticking to the maritime domain, another question is asked, how is the Maldivian government planning for climate change and rising sea levels? Now, I know this doesn't relate exactly to what we're talking about, but this is a broader question if you want to talk about that.
How honest should I be? I mean, you'd think climate change would be the single biggest factor that impacts all our long-term decisions. Not just long-term decisions, but all our development decisions. But unfortunately, each new government's development decision seems to be based more on political expediency rather than factoring climate change as a concern. I understand. I'm saying this, I'm bringing domestic politics into this, not just because, I mean, my entire adult life has been about domestic politics, but because it informs the foreign policy choices as well. I think looking from the outside, it can look like that the Maldives is an emerging or a key player in climate change negotiations. But does it really impact the development decisions that all Maldivian governments are making on the ground? Are climate change decisions impacting different governments' decisions for land reclamation, for instance? which areas would we build for resorts? I mean, does it, if where the revenue is concerned, does climate change and the long-term impact of climate change and the long-term impact of these development decisions actually factor in? Unfortunately, no.
There's another question here that concerns the role of Turkey in the Maldives, in the Maldives foreign and security policy, which you mentioned in your talk. The person is asking, what is the role of Turkey and what implications does it have on the Maldives Foreign Policy Balancing Act and relations with India, especially as Turkey has been increasingly close to Pakistan?
I mean, it's a very emerging, it's a very emerging flashpoint. And which is why I said all our partners, including the USA, the European Union, the United Kingdom, and certainly India and China will be watching this very closely. And I think Maldivians are watching this very closely as well. And it looks like it's by and large a military partnership. And very publicized partnership as well. So I think this warrants for some close scrutiny here onwards. I think it's in somebody did ask if, for instance, religion, Maldives being 100% Muslim country, if that plays a role as well. In this relationship, I do not think that is a factor. And I think emerging Turkey strength in the Maldives would definitely warrant a lot of scrutiny over the next few years.
And since we're talking about Pakistan as well, there's actually a question about Maldives' relations with other South Asian neighbors, be it Pakistan or Bangladesh. Would you care to comment on that as well?
I think Sri Lanka is very close to our hearts. I mean, a lot of Maldivians live there. A lot of Sri Lankans live here, and Sri Lanka is very close to our hearts. With other South Asian countries, the relationship hasn't really shifted much since the Cold War era, non-aligned. We're partners, we're members of SAARC, and our relationship over the last 60 odd years has remained quite stable and friendly over the last decades.
And you mentioned in reference to one of the questions about the role of religion. There's another question actually on religion as well, which is about the rise of Hindu right-wing politics or Hindutva in India. Does that impact the way people in Maldives view their relations with India?
I think it does. I think it does. Maldivians, first and foremost, were Muslims. We very much, it's our single biggest identity. And therefore, rising Hindu nationalism definitely would impact Maldivian sentiment.
And there's another question that changes track into something that's more domestic and economic about the Maldives itself. How much of Maldives' debt is commercial and how much of it is through political channels, government and IOs, etc.? What proportion of Maldives' debt is directly connected to its foreign policy? I know it's a broad question that is also a sort of a political trap in a way, but
I definitely couldn't give you a figure off the top of my head, but very much connected to our foreign policy choices. Very much connected to the choices that we made around 2019. When our debt rose, I mean, really a huge increase, and then around and post-COVID.
We have another question relating to religion as well, and this time about religion in the Maldives itself. And Maldives, as you noted as well in your talk, has been grappling with the issue of Islamic extremism at various phases as well. How does the Maldives perceive itself tackling this issue? And are there states like, do they see states like India or Turkey, etc., as partners in combating the threat of Islamic extremism?
Maldives is collaborating with all our partners on tackling terrorism, on tackling our security issues, for instance, for sure. Yes. I mean, that's the short answer.
Okay, fair enough. There's also this sort of lingering question, right, about when a country takes money from China as part of the BRI project, etc. There is this idea of the debt trap, which you alluded to as well. I know India's projects are calibrated in a different way, but does that discourse apply to India's projects as well?
No, it doesn't. I mean, where India's assistance is concerned, I think I raised the three main concerns in the Maldives. One is delays about the projects. Secondly, a perceived interventionism here with the military presence. And third, and the new president, as soon as he was sworn in, he asked India to remove any military presence here, who were operating the helicopters that India had lent, and India was very quick to oblige. And the third is political favoritism and vested interest in domestic politics. These are the factors that have come up in Maldivian discourse, not land grab. And I think that is why people here, people elsewhere are so wary of Chinese assistance. And I mean, that is why commentators say, stick to your friends. I mean, prioritize the stability of this region.
Now, there's a question about the sticky situation that happened between the Maldives and India over the Lakshadweep and tourism kerfuffle. What is the relationship between Maldives and Lakshadweep beyond the recent calls in India of building up Lakshadweep as a tourism alternative to Maldives during the recent India-Maldives kerfuffle? Are there projects and ideas on improving connectivity, regional cooperation on tourism, climate change, etc.?
Not with a specific region of India, but definitely with India, increasing connectivity, increasing tourism, connectivity, mostly flights, more tourists coming, more Indian tourists coming to the Maldives, and we have a lot of trade, and so increasing that trade, like I said, negotiations on a free trade agreement. So, I mean, relationship between Maldives and the Lakshadweep, I mean, that was never the topic. The topic was how Maldivian officials responded to Prime Minister Modi's visit to those islands.
And I know much of this that when the issue blew up, much of it was fought on social media. Is that over? Is there still remnants of that?
It looks like it's over, and what's left on social media now is the political opposition very gleefully pointing at the government, saying, we told you so. We told you you'd have to go back to India. We told you you would have to take Indian assistance. What happened to all your political posturing? So just political spats. But really, it's all died down, I think.
Coming back to the geopolitical issue, and I know we are running up to time now, but I'll just squeeze in one more question. We know that recently India has also opened a airstrip in Mauritius, etc. And is there any reading of that in the Maldives about how India is positioning itself?
Definitely. I mean, Maldivians, policymakers and politicians would be watching the entire neighborhood very closely. Maldives has been reading a lot on Sri Lanka's experiences. And that is probably the foremost reading that the Maldives has been taking, but definitely would be reading India and China and other partners changing roles in the entire region and neighborhood, I think. And we have to.
You have to, isn't it? Especially with the shifting geopolitic terrain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Eva, it's been lovely speaking to you. I know I speak on behalf of everybody who's joined us. We've benefited from your insights, and thank you for taking the time to join us. This will not be the last time you'll be joining us. But apart from that, we're also delighted that we could kick this series off with discussion on the Maldives, because I think this dynamics of the small states, but also the dynamics of the maritime terrain is something that we need to bear in mind. We'll definitely have you back to talk. We have a number of issues that we need to get you on for gender development issues, but also blue economy issues, which I didn't want to squeeze in here because I think they deserve much more attention separately. So, Eva, thank you for joining us today. And thank you all for joining this discussion. And I'll just like to say before we end that our next webinar in the India in Asia series will be in September, and it will be focusing on India and the Philippines. So thank you, Eva, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.